Hello, friends. Bo Prosser, Center for Christian Education, www.c4ce.org, welcoming you to another episode of our preaching series. Today, we're looking at preaching with imagination with two of my favorite preachers. So, welcome. You know my preaching mentor, Dr. Chuck Bugg, preaching pastor in churches in Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, interim pastor in several churches, professor of preaching in several of our divinity schools, and senior associate of preaching with the Center for Christian Education. So, Chuck, welcome back and thanks for joining me this morning. And Mary Alice Birdwhistle, welcome to you as well. Wonderful friend, wonderful proclaimer, pastoring in right now as interim pastor at Faith in Georgetown, Kentucky, also having pastored churches in Texas and Kentucky. So, Mary Alice, welcome to you and thanks for joining in today.
Thanks for the invitation.
It's going to be a fun time. So, I want to give you, for just a moment, a model of what we will be looking at for our time together. We're going to be talking about imagination within three different aspects: imagining the self, imagining ourselves within the text, and imagining ourselves and the text as we proclaim to the world. So I'll begin with this quote from my favorite theologian, Albert Einstein. Imagination is everything. It is the preview of life's coming attractions. So let's move into the conversation. Thank you, friends, for joining me. This is going to be fun together. Mary Alice, as we think about imagining ourselves and finding our pastoral voice, how does that begin to happen? How do you see that happening?
Yeah, it's such a good question, Bo. And I think I struggled with this for a long time because as a woman in ministry, I could not imagine myself as a pastor, as a preacher. I'd never seen that. And we often say, you can't be what you can't see. And so I had to develop the confidence and had to wrestle with my theology and discern my calling. And in the midst of that, began to see myself behind the pulpit. But even at that point, I was really, I think, tempted to imitate other voices. So when I was growing up, Beth Moore was a big kind of women's speaker, Bible study teacher, still is. But she was the first example for me of a woman teaching the Bible, preaching. And so I thought, oh, I can be like the next Beth Moore. And it was actually Dwight Moody who said to me, Mary Alice, the world doesn't need another Beth Moore. The world needs a Mary Alice. Um, I remember preaching at my church, Calvary Baptist in Waco, and a lot of my seminary professors went to church there. In fact, I opened up the commentary. I was preaching on a passage in Psalms, and my professor who wrote the commentary is sitting in the congregation. So I thought, how do you preach to the people who wrote the commentary? But I
Absolutely.
remembered Dr. Moody's words of these people aren't looking for a replica of their voices. They are looking for your voice and what is the unique thing that God is trying to say through you. And so I really try to lean into that. One thing that's really important to me is that I don't say anything behind the pulpit that I wouldn't say to you right now or wouldn't say with someone having a cup of coffee, that I want to speak through my authentic God-given voice. And so that's really something I try to sit with and listen to each week as I'm working on my sermon.
Well, you do it well, and you have learned your lessons well along the way. Chuck, what about you? How do you imagine yourself, and how have you found your pastoral voice?
It's interesting to hear Mary Alice talk about, kind of struggling to find your voice. Being a male, I never had to deal with the issue of whether I would be accepted in the pulpit, but I had to deal with the issue of who was I going to be when I came to the pulpit. And there were, I grew up with many different ministers who were prominent. Billy Graham, went to seminary, John Claypool, and others whom I heard along the way. And the difficulty for me was moving through various seasons of preaching, trying to be like somebody else, trying to be like this person, trying to tell stories like a Fred Craddock, but realizing that what I really had to offer was the gifts that God had given to me. And I had to accept the fact that, um, that meant that I had some gifts and I had some limits and I had to work on some things in terms of my own proclamation. So, it's been kind of a journey for me of finding my voice. And I think it really wasn't until in my 40s that I think I found my voice, but I continued to try to develop other things that I felt could be stronger in my preaching.
Well, you both are wonderful proclaimers, and I think you are living into your unique selves, both as male and female, as God has created you wonderfully and fearfully, not only as people, but as proclaimers. One thing I'm curious about, what about when you're in the middle of presenting and suddenly a thought pops into your mind and you have to deal with the spontaneity of the moment. You both do this so well. I know that not everything you share is scripted.
Hmm.
So, how do you deal with spontaneity?
I think it's part of learning to trust the spirit, trusting myself in that moment, also knowing the audience, knowing your context. Sometimes it's the divine moment for what the church and that community needs to hear. And so I think, there comes a point every week when I say, okay, I've done my part. I've done my work. Now I'm trusting God to do God's work, and this is bigger than me. I am participating in something that is so much bigger than myself, and learning to let go and trust that, which is scary, but also exciting.
Well, it's part of the mystery, is it not?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Uh, Chuck, you do this so well. Uh, what are some insights you can share with us?
Well, I love the way that Mary Alice emphasizes that as we preach, we are dependent on the Spirit of God. And looking back in the teaching of preaching, I think I would have put far more emphasis on that than on the techniques of how to prepare a sermon, deliver a sermon. I've often said that you and I, as preachers, are preparing a sermon for the delivery of the sermon,
Hmm.
which means that in the delivery, this is still time in which things can break into our lives,
Mm-hmm.
words, uh, ways of saying things that may be different. Very often, a lot of the things that I change in my sermon are done in the first part of the worship service
Hmm.
as I try to get a feel for what is going on.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember the last time I preached at Faith, I started with something that I didn't even have until the service was going on, and I felt
Mm,
that this is the way I should begin this sermon.
I remember one church I was visiting in as the guest proclaimer. At the beginning of worship, a bird was let loose in the sanctuary. I don't know where the bird came from, how it got there, but when you got to the pulpit, you had to talk about the bird.
right.
That that certainly was not in the teaching plan, but you had to speak to it. Uh,
Absolutely.
Chuck, I've often heard you say that we preach to be heard, and that there are lots of opportunity to use our voice, to use gestures, facial expressions, how we moderate the tone of our voice, the pace. You are one of the very best at slowing down to allow the
Mm.
congregation to think along with you. And then the illustrations that we use. But, Chuck, I think the question, to paraphrase Willie Shakespeare, to manuscript or not to manuscript, Dr. Bugg?
I can tell you how I do it, and then I can tell you what I tell others. Um, I've done it all kinds of ways in my ministry. I have used manuscripts. I have memorized the sermon. I've discovered that I am not good at memorizing because what happens is it becomes choppy. I am memorizing in paragraphs that I've written, and it becomes, rather than blending together, it becomes very episodic. I have come to the place where I don't use a manuscript or notes. Now, that is not to mean that we grow through different stages and finally, look, Mom, I'm coming to the pulpit without any notes. I
No
mean,
training wheels.
yeah, um, there are ministers who very effectively use manuscripts, and I would say that if you are preaching on something that is very controversial or is controversial or is difficult to understand, or you believe that you're going to get maybe some misunderstanding of what you said, you need a manuscript
Hmm.
because somebody will come up to you and say, I heard you say this,
Hmm.
and you need to have the manuscript because on those kinds of issues, people's minds are going everywhere. Um, I would make that exception to the way I do it. That means that sometimes I don't get everything that I've written into the sermon. I will forget something. But what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to visualize the movement of the sermon. I'm trying to see the sermon as a whole, as a beginning, moving through the sermon to the end. And I think it's very important if you do that, that, I mean, obviously you want a powerful or something to say in the sermon, but we need to know how to get started and we need to know how to end. We can't just
Absolutely.
dribble off into, that's all, folks.
Yeah.
Um,
Uh, Mary Alice, you are a manuscript preacher.
I
Uh,
am.
Tell
Yeah.
us how that works for you.
Well, I was an English major. I'm a writer, so words are so important to me, and getting just the right word to capture a moment, which can be a strength and can be a weakness. That's I think any of these models you can lean on too heavily or it can be a huge asset. So for me, I'm spending my week writing the sermon. But in the back of my mind, I'm also asking myself, okay, how would I say that? And again, like, would I say that to the person sitting having a cup of coffee? And if not, I need to say that differently.
Yeah.
But then by the weekend, I'm just living into the sermon. I'm not writing anymore. I'm digesting and really letting these words percolate over me so that by the time I get up there, I know them. I always say that God's got to speak a word to me, and I've got to receive that before I go to preach it. So I
Yeah.
think it's receiving that, it's letting it percolate, living into it so that so that you're not reading it. That I think that
Right.
is the downside of a manuscript is the tendency to read it, and you can't do that. But I think there is a way you can spring forth from it.
And you're not in sermon jail by that manuscript, but you are
No, no,
interacting yourself imagination, God's imagination, the spirit imagination, all that's going on, the bird in the sanctuary,
right.
right? You are moving. So I'll share this quote with you by Fred Craddock, a beloved professor of preaching and proclaimer. There isn't just one right way to preach. So let's move on to imagining the text and how then we bring the scriptures to life. Uh, I would give you this quote as we enter this conversation. Questioning a text is a creative, imaginative activity. The church has heard this passage probably many, many, many times before, Tom Long says. He goes on to say, we work with our imagination and God's Spirit to challenge the church afresh. So, Chuck, as we try to begin bringing the scriptures to life, how do you suggest we get into the imagination of the text with the imagination of ourselves? What are we doing to bring these scriptures to life?
Well, Bo, one thing I would say is I really start with the assumption that I don't have to bring the scriptures to life, that these scriptures have a past and they have a present and they have a future. It is more than just words that are written on a page. They are words that I assume have life in them. And my task is to try to move in to that text to hear the resonance of life in that text and what it is I want to preach in that text. I think one of the things I've been working on a sermon on Thanksgiving for the group of ministers that we meet with Bo, and I'm using a text from Colossians where Paul said, with endurance and patience, joyfully giving thanksgiving to God. I want to talk about more than Thanksgiving as a transaction. I want to talk about it as a transformative thing in our lives. But I'm caught by those two words with endurance and patience, joyfully giving thanks to the Lord. Why patience? Why endurance? Because normally when I think about gratitude, I don't think about endurance and patience. But here I am confronted with a text, and I have a choice. I can either ignore because I can't find immediately how that fits together, which is not a good thing, or I can try to see patience and endurance. joyfully giving thanks to God. That may be the most transformative word in there. Not just giving thanks, but with patience and with endurance. And while it doesn't immediately fit together in my mind, it is in the text. And I have to deal with that, think about that, pray about that, think about the congregation to whom I'm preaching and what they are facing. What is it we need? Endurance, patience. I would say these are things that are absolutely integral to anybody who is going to live life with a sense, a transformative sense of gratitude.
So you're going from your private self, hearing the words of scripture come alive to you, and then you're translating those to the public selves, if you will. Holy listening and prayer. You have both talked about marinating of ideas. Mary Alice, what about for you as you begin to live into the text? How do you do that?
Yeah, to me, this is the fun part. I love sitting with the text and just asking questions, imagining where I am in the story. Who do I really connect with or resonate with? Like this past week, I preached on the Jesus's first miracle in the Gospel of John and turning the water into wine at the wedding. But I focused on Mary. I said, often Jesus is the focus of this parable, or the story, but what would it have been like to be in Mary's shoes? And she's the one who notices that the wine has run out in the first place. She's the one who goes to Jesus and says, "Hey, we need to do something about this." He kind of pushes her off for a minute. And so finally she goes to the servants and says, "Hey, do whatever he tells you to do." And she like almost eyeballs him like, "Hey, Jesus, I know you can do something about this." And that's such a position that I can put myself in because I can look at the world around me and say, hey, here are all the ways that we are running out of wine. Come on, Jesus, we need you to do something about this. Help us out.
Mm.
So it's always fun to imagine myself in the text. I will say, in order to do that, I've got to guard my time and give myself the space to do that. So, to me, one of the biggest challenges of being a pastor is there's always that to-do list never ends. There's always more that needs to be done. And oftentimes, I can't get to an imaginative place if those other things haven't been somehow addressed and I can set them aside. Another thing that is important to me is just really guarding my sermon writing time. So every pastor's schedule is different. There's not a right or wrong way to do it, but you've got to guard your time of, hey, I'm doing sermon prep every Wednesday morning from 7 to 10. That preparation time is almost more important than the writing time because that's when all these imaginative conversations take place. Um, I'm also planning ahead all the time. I try to be planning 3 months ahead to know where I'm going. Because when I know where I'm going, then I can pay attention to the world around me and ideas about the text just kind of pop in. So that guarding that planning time, honoring your preaching time and keeping it holy, really is an important practice. But then, like, trusting that a word is going to come. I think early on I got really anxious if, like, by Friday I did not have a good idea of what my sermon was going to be. Um, but I learned to trust that it's almost like manna that, okay, we do our work and God does God's work, and a word does come. It doesn't always come on my timeline, but it always comes, and being open to that is the biggest challenge and the biggest gift of preaching, I think.
Sometimes it comes when you're sitting in the worship service,
Right?
still praying, still praying
Yes.
for a word. Uh, Let me share with you this quote from Frederick Buechner, another one of our fabulous writers and affirmers of the preaching pastor. Developing the message is listening to your life
Mm,
within the text, uh, living in the text through your own boredom and pain, as well as excitement and gladness as
mm,
you touch, taste, and smell your way to the holy. What a wonderful, imaginative word picture for us. And Bigner says, at the end, you realize no matter what, that life is grace.
mm.
So, Mary Alice, uh, how much time does it take you in a normal week? You've come in already with the sermon title and the text, perhaps an idea or two, but how much time does it take for you during the week
Mm.
to touch, taste, and smell your way into this
Mm.
delicious holiness?
Yeah. On an ideal week, I say I like to have 8 hours. Now, that's not all 8 hours at once. In fact, I like that to be split up. I like to, I often say I can't write a sermon without going to a coffee shop and like just kind of watching the people around me, imagining how they might receive this word, how they might intersect with this text. I can't write a sermon without going on a walk and again, letting those ideas percolate. I think that's a theme that is kept coming up today.
Yes.
Um, I also know that some weeks there just aren't 8 hours. And that's a reality of the pastoral life too. And so I think it's this fine balance between guarding those times of sermon writing and sermon preparation and trusting the Spirit on those weeks when 8 hours just aren't there.
Yeah.
Um, But again, I would say the more time I can spend planning ahead, looking ahead for the next 3 months, the more it helps on those weeks when the 8 hours just aren't there because I've set the table already for the conversation.
Right. And so, Chuck, what about you? What kind of time, if in an ideal week, what kind of time would you like to have?
I've said 10 to 12 hours, but I recognize that when I was a pastor, there were so many things that were happening that were on my mind. But I would also say that sometimes those of us who are in the ministry of the church may use that as an excuse not to work on our sermon.
Yes.
That somebody's in the hospital and I've got to be there right away. You know, drawing boundaries for ourselves in which I would say in terms of who I was as a pastor, that for me, the most important hour as the pastor, preacher of the church was that morning worship hour. And if I wasn't prepared for that and didn't see that as absolutely crucial, I could just be drawn in all kinds of directions. I'm like Mary Alice, and she does this so beautifully in a creative way. What I do is when I was a pastor on Monday morning, believe it or not, I would go into the office and I would basically say to my secretary, unless somebody is bleeding out of all the pores of their bodies, tell them I'll call them later. And on Monday morning, I would just look at that text and read it And as Karl Barth once said, he said, I have read many books, but the Bible reads me.
Oh,
And so I want to look at that. And what I'm doing is I'm not just reading the text, but I'm saying, how does this read me? How does the word endurance read me? And then I want to turn the Bible the other way, figuratively speaking, where I say, how does it read the people to whom I'm preaching? Now, I have to do that kind of preparation in private. I'm not good, with if I hear a phone ring, I immediately think it's a call from me. I would always try to find a space in the church that was my preparation space, and I could just leave it and
mm,
close the door, leave the books open, leave whatever I had. I didn't have to tidy it all up, and then I could come back to it. But a lot of, you know, the time is difficult to pin down because you're doing it at different times, as Mary Alice said, and you're doing different things. When I come after I prepare the sermon, usually I try to get it done by Thursday. Then I'm spending, uh, then I try to have time more with my family, less being pressed by the work of the church. But at the same time, every Saturday morning, I would I would go to that private place in the church, and I would just say to myself as I read that, as I looked at what I had written, uh, what is this saying about God? What is this saying to me? What is this? May this say to some people in the church? And I would go back to those words of Karl Barth. I have read many books, but the Bible reads me.
absolutely. Absolutely. And these words from William Sloane Coffin come to mind. Sermon writing is basically created within the ministry of interruptions,
Hmm.
that we move from one thing to the next. He goes on to say, in a world of pain, crying out for change, so many American churches have basically come down to management and therapy. He stated this quote in the 1960s,
Mm.
uh, just as applicable, if not more, today. Uh, lots of different uh, interruptions that are coming at us, and you both have woven the thread wonderfully of the starts and stops, and the wrestling with the text. And I come back to it, and within the ministry of interruptions, I finally create it.
Mm.
So let's move then to our final point of the presentation, and that is uh, imagining the world and connecting with the needs of the world. So I'm imagining myself and I'm finding my voice. I'm imagining this text and how that's going to come to life. And then how am I going to intersect those with the needs of the world? One more Karl Barth quote for you. We preach with the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other. So, Mary Alice, how do you bring yourself and your text to the world in which you're speaking week after week?
I think this is why I say that preaching and pastoral care have to be interconnected, that you can't do one well without the other. Because in order to preach a word that's going to connect with your congregation, your community, you got to be a part of their lives. You've got to be with them in the day to day. You have to have sat at their kitchen table or at their bedside or been at their kids' baseball game, wherever they are, your life has to intersect with that in some way in order for you to be able to speak to that on Sunday mornings. So as I'm writing my sermon, I am literally closing my eyes and envisioning the people in the congregation. Um, every church I've pastored, people tend to sit in the same pew or the same general area every week. And so I can go section by section, pew by pew, and say, okay, how is this going to connect with the couple who is struggling with infertility right now? How is this going to connect with the single mom, three kids, just trying to make it? How is this going to connect with you fill in the blank? Another thing I do is realizing that social media can be a great tool here. We all know all the dangers and challenges of social media, but I've found it's a great way to connect with people throughout the week. I love putting out a question, say, hey, I'm thinking about this for my sermon. What are your thoughts? Or do you have a story on this? Or tell me about a time that this happened. And I'm always amazed at the ways that people engage and respond, or will even reach out to me privately. Um, I've been able to see some major themes that way. I've been able to really get at the heart of what are people wrestling with, struggling with.
Mhm.
And so social media can be a great tool to preachers. And it also, especially today's generation, they're not going to call the church office and tell you what's going on, but they're going to post it in some way in social media. Um, so when used appropriately, that can be a great tool.
I liked what you said as we were getting ready for this. You said it is a listening tool. So many of
Mm,
us just want to speak on
right, right.
Facebook or Instagram or wherever we find ourselves, but you use this as a listening tool. I really like that
Mm.
uh, analogy. So, uh, Chuck, how do we share our stories without being one dimensional with them? And how do we share our stories appropriately?
Mm.
That's a very, very profound question. And I think one thing we measure what it is that we're going to share. Uh, there are some things that we can simply share that are part of the fabric of everybody's lives. And I wouldn't call that self-disclosure. But there are other things that we may share. For example, our son David, when he was 10 years old, 43 years ago, had a brain tumor. Obviously, I would be lying to you if I didn't say that every day in some way that affects me. He's still living. He's such a blessing. He's caring. He's kind. Uh, we had to learn to redream the dream about David. And when I share that, what I don't want, I want to have worked through that story enough so that I don't break down when I'm telling it. I mean, all of us have heard people tell a personal story and they break down. And what happens then to the listeners is they feel uncomfortable. They feel, how can we help? Have I worked through it enough to say, I never expected this as a minister? Every night at our kitchen table, we would say the same prayer. God is great. God is good. My child has a brain tumor.
Mm.
Is God great? Is God good? Well, I come to share with you this morning that I believe that I'm going to keep saying that same prayer at the dinner table. Because in spite of what I feel sometimes, I want to affirm God is great. God is good. And if I don't believe that,
Mm.
I have nothing really to share with you.
Yeah. And those are words that help us if we are in the pew celebrating life today, if we are in the pew discouraged and beaten down by life today, or if we're in the pew lost today, to hear that God is great and God is good are words that affirm us regardless of where we find ourselves. John Claypool, who is another great influencer of preaching, has said that uh, for himself, the biggest challenge as a week to week preacher was finding the grace that would keep him moving. How do you all find the grace to keep moving?
I would just say, I think you've got to tend to the needs of your own soul and your own imagination. You are pouring out your well week after week after week. And so finding those quiet moments, whatever that looks like for you, to tend to the grace within you before you can ever speak a life-giving word for the world. I think the world needs hope right now. And if we're not careful, we can get so bogged down with everything that's happening that the pulpit becomes more of a space of doom and gloom and anxiety and worry and despair. And so I think there's a fine balance between being attuned to that. We can't turn the news off right now. We can't push it under the rug or ignore it. But we also can't become so absorbed by it that we forget this is not the end of the story and this does not get
Exactly.
the final word. And so finding a way to honestly wrestle with the world around us, but tend to our own souls and spirits so that we can authentically proclaim a word of hope is maybe the most important work we can be doing right now.
Not every Sunday can be a lament in ashes and sackcloth. Uh,
Yeah.
Chuck, what about you? Where do you find the hope and grace to carry on?
It's interesting. I grew up in a church where I think that the thrust of receiving Christ or accepting Christ, as these words were used in my church, was about whether you're going to spend your life in heaven or in hell.
Mm-hmm.
It also was about certain things that you didn't do, like dancing and drinking. Uh, if I heard the word grace, I,
Mm.
I never remember it. It was only later, I think, when I had nothing else to fall back on, when I had nowhere else to go, it was there that I had to find what the Bible talks about as that unconditional love of God.
Mm.
I love Nadia Bolz-Weber's way of saying it. She talks about the grace of God that calls us to love our enemies
Mm.
and to do things that we normally wouldn't do. And then she makes a statement. She says, when I hear things like that, I'm aware that the gospel is the worst good news
Mm,
I've ever heard.
yeah.
Um,
Absolutely. Yeah. So I want to pull out a quote from each of you and ask you to give us just a minute or two
Mm,
on this. Mary Alice, you have said a couple of times in our conversation, both as we were preparing for this and sort of around it,
mm,
we can't say it all every week.
mm.
Not every sermon I preach can meet every need. So unpack that just a little bit more for us and relieve our anxiety about having to do that.
Yeah. There is a physical, tangible weight that comes with being a pastor. We all feel it in different places, but I think we all feel it. I feel it in my neck and my back. I mean, there's just a weight that comes with it that I never felt when I was a children's minister, associate pastor, but when you are the one asked to be in that pulpit every week, there's just a weight that comes with that. And one of the things that has at least lightened a little bit of that weight for me is to remind myself I can't say it all every week. And I don't have to. Nobody expects me to. Um, in fact, I think the preachers who try to get up there and say everything end up saying nothing at all because you just lose everybody. So to give myself the grace that we've been talking about to remember, okay, there's next week and there's the week after that and there's the week after that. I'm going to do the best I can with the resources God has given me, with the time God has given me, with the gifts God has given me to say this unique word for this unique time and space and people. And I try to put that word on a post-it note and I put it on my screen of my computer as I'm writing my sermon. What is the one thing I'm trying to say this week? And if something else comes up, I'll put it in another document. I'll save it for another day even. Um, but if it doesn't make the post-it note, it doesn't make the sermon.
That's awesome. You both have talked about once you get honed in on that theme, you
Hmm.
stay on that theme. Uh,
Yes.
it's easy to chase rabbits. It's
Yes.
easy to do a time suck on Facebook
Yes.
or wherever else, um, even in the coffee shop. I'm not
Oh
disciplined
yeah.
enough in the coffee shop to write, but to to stay focused on that theme and to hone in on it week after week after week is definitely a discipline and definitely one that comes with practice. And so, Chuck, you say often, I'm trying to bring a word of hope every week, that there are multiple constituencies within that congregation, but they all need a word of hope. Unpack that just for a minute for me.
First of all, I want to say thanks to you, Bo, for putting this together. And uh, I happen to be a member at Faith Baptist in Georgetown. And I want to say we could not wish for a better minister and preacher than Mary Alice Birdwhistle. Uh, she is truly a gift to our church.
Thank
I guess I am trying to bring a word of hope,
you. Hmm.
but I don't want it to be uh, the kind of hope that sounds thin in a
Hmm.
world that's thick with
Mm.
Yeah.
problems.
That'll preach, Chuck.
You know, a tousled-haired, red-haired boy at Annunciation Catholic Church in Minneapolis was interviewed the day after some of the students were killed. And he said, I'm scared. I'm really scared.
Hmm.
But he said it with poise. And he talked about his friend Victor, who put his, or Vincent, who put his body on top of this boy's body.
Mm.
Vincent got shot in the back, he said. He's going to be okay. But I love Vincent for what he did.
Mm.
Maybe I don't have to say the word hope. Maybe that 10-year-old
Mm.
redheaded boy is saying it far more effectively than I can say it. But, you know, I do think that people don't come to church to have more crepe hanged in their lives or hung in their lives. They do want to go out with some feeling that not just hope, but the feeling that there is a God who doesn't cure everything, who doesn't make everything all right in our lives, but a God who is always present to us.
Absolutely. You folks are just amazing. And the word hope is not lost on me, Chuck. You have been 4 seasons with me
Mm.
bringing a word of hope through our Holding Hope series, and that's available on YouTube. And Mary Alice, I'm guessing we can catch you on video replay, live streaming through.
Through faith, yeah.
And
And then I'm working on a website. It'll be up later this fall. So,
okay, so
yeah.
practitioners are available to you. You can watch us work week after week. I'd like to leave you with this closing thought from Mary Oliver. When it comes to preaching and when it comes to life, pay attention, be astonished, and tell about it. That's what we do as proclaimers of the gospel and as ambassadors for Christ. We are all preachers in some way or another. And I'm grateful to these friends, and they're sharing their insights with you today around using imagination in our preaching as we think about who we are, the thinking about what the text is, and then how we bring that to intersect with the world's needs. These are a few resources that we have identified. If you would like a copy of our slides, uh, email me and I'll be happy to give you a copy of the deck. Mary Alice and Chuck are both available through email, and you can always get to us through www.c4ce.org, which is the website for the Center for Christian Education. Mary Alice and Chuck, you have been delightful and so insightful today. I thank you for your energy and for your words and for the grace with which you have challenged us today. So thanks for joining me.
Thank you
Thank
both.
you.
Thank you.
I feel like
Thank
we've
you,
been to
Mary
church
Alice.
together. It's been a
We
gift.
have. We have been to church. It's awesome. Thanks, everybody, for joining me. Bo Prosser, Center for Christian Education, www.c4ce.org. And until I see you again, everybody, keep on rocking.